By now you've looked at all of the color videos that you've seen on the material section of the module. If you haven't, please go back and do that. It's going to be some important information for you to have. For this kind of final project for our color and value module, you are creating acrylic paintings of either yourself or someone you know, and you're playing with the different color harmonies. You will take a photo, tweak it in Photoshop to reduce the detail, and then divide the image into at least 5 different sections, and then you'll paint a different color harmony in each section. So all of these student examples that you're seeing, they actually have more than 5 sections. Don't let that throw you. You can always have more than 5, you just have to have 5 at least. So let's talk about how you're going to make these. Okay, in order to get started with your painting, the first thing that you'll have to do is correct the image that you're going to be using. So I'm just going to open the photo that I'm going to use in Photoshop. You could do this in Photoshop, or you can use it. You can use a GIMP for this as well. So you want to make sure that you have a really clear, well-lit photograph to start with. And it should be a portrait, so that is a picture of someone. You can use yourself as the model, or you could paint a friend or a roommate or a family member. It's really up to you. You want to make sure though that this is a real person and not a famous person. So no actresses or actors, sports figures, musicians. It should be someone you know, if not yourself. And I always find that it's easiest oftentimes to just use yourself as the model. You probably are your best model. That way you can kind of get exactly what you want. But if you're not comfortable with that, by all means, take a photo of a friend. Make sure it's really clear, make sure it's well lit. Now you can do the entire face, or you could crop it so that you're zoomed in maybe on a feature or two. It's really up to you. The benefit of doing the whole face is that it, I don't know, that we see the whole face. The benefit to cropping it so that it's just a small section of the face is that you're going to be able to probably get in there and get more detail. So anytime you are painting smaller things, it just becomes a little bit fussier, a little bit trickier. You have to use smaller brushes, but you should decide what you want to do, how it's going to work best for you. So I think what I'm going to do, just to make it a little bit easier on myself, is to crop it. So I'm going to come over here to the cropping tool, and the size of your painting is going to be 8 by 10. So you can actually type in 8 by 10 into these fields, and you'll see that that appropriate ratio of a rectangle comes up. So I'm just going to start pulling in my frame and see what could I do. Trying to imagine this as a painting. Okay, that's an option. I'm going to flip this so that it's landscape orientation. See, what if I just do my eyes, let's say. So it's a little bit more abstracted in a sense. Yeah, I don't know. Sure, let's do something like that. Okay, so once you're satisfied with it, you can go ahead and double click or hit return or enter. So that's going to be the amount of the image that we're gonna paint. So now what you want to do is you're going to desaturate it. So you want to convert this photo into black and white. We don't need the color information, we just need the value information. We're going to invent the color but stay true to the values that are in the photograph. So I'm going to come up to image, and then I can scroll down to adjustments, and then I can do this one of two ways. I can either go to black and white and hit that, or I can come down to desaturate. Essentially does the same thing. At this point, I should take a look at it and see if there's anything I could do to, I don't know, make the value pattern more dynamic or more full range. There isn't a lot of value opportunities in this. It's not really a full range of values. My face is a little bit light. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you might want to play around with it. So I come to image and then adjustments and then over to levels. I can bump up the black point and then bump up the white point, and then I can mess around with the midtones to see if I can get a few more shadows maybe, but I don't want to go so dark that it becomes crazy. So I'm going to maybe bump it up to about there, let's say. All right, and then I'm going to hit OK, and then I would save it, Command S. And I'm going to save this one as a JPEG to start with, but remember, you can also save it as a Photoshop document. That's your working file, so you can come back and make any changes that you need to your file. Make sure that you're saving at maximum quality. Okay, so there's the photo. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a filter on this, and this filter is going to reduce the number of values and shapes so that we can really easily articulate them in our painting. It's going to be a little bit more stylized, but you'll see what happens. So I'm going to come up to filter, and then I'm going to go to filter gallery, and the one that you're going to use is cutout. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and this is the number of value levels. And then edge simplicity, that just means like how smooth or how intricate these edges are. And then edge fidelity, you'll see it's just kind of how they mesh together. So I'm going to play around with the number of levels, bring it all the way up to the top. So 8 for me is going to be a lot better than the 6, because you can see with 6 I start to lose too much detail in the eye. I can try 5 to see how that works. So 5 in this case is actually better than 6, right? You can see that difference. And then I just have to decide, well, do I like 5 or do I like 8? Do I like 5 or do I like 8? I think I'm gonna, that's hard. I think I'm gonna go with 8. And then the thing that's going to change when I paint it is probably this area right here. Because my bangs are thinner, more of my skin is showing through there, and so the computer is reading this as a lighter value than it should. But I can correct that just by how I paint it. So don't feel like you're stuck. If you if all of the values aren't exactly what you need, you can, as the artist, kind of tweak them a little bit. So I just realized too that I have used the wrong picture. Yikes, but I'm so far in, I'm just going to keep going with this, and then I'll recrop it. So let's say I like that, and I think I do. I'll show you what happens if you go really, really low. So it becomes super abstracted, almost like a posterized effect. Looks like a stencil. If I go even lower, it's even more abstracted, and then that's as low as it's going to go. Let's try 4. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with 8. So now edge simplicity. If I make the edges more simplistic, you can see it gets crazy style, right? We don't want that. We want it to look realistic. So if I pull it all the way over so that there's more complicated edges, you can see what that looks like. I think I'll do like a 2 and see how that is. Seems fine to me. And then edge fidelity, do I see any difference? Very little, just like the most subtle shift ever. So I'm just going to keep it like that. Hit OK. Oh, okay, great. I don't know why it was showing the whole image, but that works. So at this point, I'm going to save it again. And I'm going to go ahead and do this as a JPEG also. And I'm going to change this. So we'll go, let's do final headshot and hit save, maximum quality. So now what I'm going to want to do is print this out. You are going to need to print out your image for this exercise. It's just going to be way easier because we're going to actually use the piece of paper and transfer it to our mixed media paper. So you want an actual print and you want it to be 8 by 10. So there are printers in the library, obviously. You might have a printer at home as well, or you can always go to a print shop like a Kinko's, FedEx type place, Office Max, whatever you need to do to print that out. 8 by 10. I'd probably print out at least 2 copies of it. That way, if something happens or you get paint all over your first one, you've got a backup. Okay, that's it for this, the pre-production, and then next I'll show you the next step. Here is my printed out image, and you can see it's in black and white. You can see my printer needs a new cartridge. These lines here, if something like that happens in yours, don't worry about it. It's not going to matter at all. So the first thing we want to do is we want to block in our image onto our mixed media paper. And block in just means quickly sketching in an overall sense of shapes of light and dark that you see in your image. So the fastest and easiest way to do this is to use transfer paper. Now you all purchase transfer paper, and there are different colors. Mine happens to be like a charcoal carbon gray. This is sort of the classic, but yours might be blue, it might be yellow, which could be a little bit light for you. And hopefully you didn't get white. They do make white transfer paper, but that's not going to help you because we're transferring onto white paper, so your lines aren't going to show up at all. If you did purchase white, don't worry about it. I'll show you how you can do a workaround for this without transfer paper. So on your transfer paper, there's a light side and a dark side, and the dark side is what you want to put down on your mixed media paper. This is the stuff that's going to transfer to the paper. So what you do is you put your transfer paper dark side down, and then you put your image on top of it. And let me see if I have some tape in here. I do not have any tape, but what I would do if I were you is I would tape this down so that it doesn't move, because you don't want to be spending all this time transferring and then it accidentally moves and then you have to redo it. So I like to tape it down, but I'm going to do it without taping it down this time. So what you're doing is you are pressing down. You can use a graphite pencil, you could use a ballpoint pen, you could even use like a stick, as long as it was like a super small or pointed end, even like a cuticle thing. What do they call those that you push your cuticles back with? Or you could use like a bamboo skewer, which is sort of random, but just a ballpoint pen will work. You don't need to worry about ruining this image. This is just something that we're working off of. It's not something that's going to be a finished piece. So what you're going to start to do is you're going to start to draw around your edges the shapes of light and dark. And you can see how tape is going to really help you out with this. You can simplify the edges a little bit. I wouldn't go too simple though. You definitely want detail in there. Whoops. If you mess up like that, not to worry. It's not going to hurt anything. And I want to draw around all of these shapes, every single value that I see. And I'm going to pay a lot of attention when I come to the eye area. So I want to make sure that I draw around every little shape possible, including little highlights. Even though the color of my pupil and iris are really close in this printout, I'm still going to, since I can see a difference, I'm still going to draw around each one separately. Basically what you're doing is you're making a map for yourself. And this is going to, in a way, end up being sort of like a paint by numbers kind of image. I don't know if anybody does that anymore, but I remember when I was a kid, I used to love that. I would probably, it's not a terrible idea to even draw around the edge of your picture plane. And I'll get a better result if I do that with a ruler, so maybe I'll come back and do that after. Okay, so you're just going to keep going through your image until you have traced or transferred every single line. Okay, so I very carefully traced all of the shapes of light and dark. Now I'm going to lift up to see my transfer, and there we have it. So you can see it definitely has that paint by number kind of look, a little bit like a topographical map. So even though it looks, pretty confusing right now, I'm going to be able to compare it with my photograph and figure out which area is going to go which value. Okay, so let's say you bought the wrong kind of transfer paper. One thing that you can do to transfer it without using transfer paper is you're going to need some charcoal for this, is the best way to do it. You can do it with graphite, but it doesn't work as well. So you can take a piece of, find my charcoal here, a piece of vine charcoal, something that's pretty light and easy to get rid of. And using the side of the charcoal, you would pretty much saturate the whole back of your image. That's kind of cool how the pressure of my transfer, the lines show up, but it doesn't really help us. Okay, so I'm just going to shake off the extra here. There we go. Flip this over. So you would put it charcoal side down. It does you no good to put it charcoal side up. Like that. I would still probably tape it down if you could. And then you're going to do exactly what I told you to do with the transfer paper. So you're coming through and you're drawing around all these little shapes of light and dark. You don't need to go crazy with your pressure, but you don't want to be weak sauce with it either. So let me just really quickly just do a section, and then you'll see how it transfers there. So that's what you're going to use if you bought the wrong kind of transfer paper. No worries whatsoever. So let's talk about the next step. You are going to create a design that essentially you're going to lay on top of this. And the design is going to break this image into at least 5 different sections or areas. So let me just move this over here. I'll use the same piece of paper. So what I like to do is I like to do thumbnails for something like this. So I'm going to draw a bunch of rectangles. I'm not even going to bother with my ruler. You could. And I could be tighter with my proportions, my ratio of width to height, but it's all going to be good. So I want to break up this image into 5 different sections because I'm going to do a different color palette in each one. One section is going to be achromatic, so that's black and white. One section is going to be analogous, and those are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. One is going to be triadic, which is colors that are evenly spaced on the color wheel. Another one is going to be complementary, and then split. And complementary that uses colors that are opposing one another on the color wheel. And then you'll do split complementary. So let's say if you had, here's your color wheel, and you've got blue. See if I can do this. I'm doing this upside down, so apologies. Yellow and red. Those are your 3 primaries, right? So remember that a complement, those are colors that are opposite one another on the color wheel. So you've got red and green, blue and orange, and then yellow and violet or purple. When you do a split complement, instead of it being a primary and its complement, it is a hue or one color, and then you take the other color and you use the colors that are immediately flanking it. So it would be violet blue, or blue violet, sorry, should flip that, blue violet. So that's that color right in here. And then it would be blue green. Okay, so a split complement would use, in this situation, it would use orange, blue violet, and blue green. Or it could be red and then blue green and yellow green. Or it could be violet and then yellow green or yellow orange. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Please let me know if it doesn't. There's lots of information on the videos provided in the materials section of the module that goes through all of the color harmony basics so that you kind of understand what each harmony means. So because we need all of these different sections, this is also another opportunity for us to think about design and how can we be creative with how we break up this image. So there's no right way to do it. I'm going to start just by doing something, I don't know, maybe like this. So what would happen if I drew these lines kind of like this over this image, and then each one had a separate section or separate color harmony? Maybe I'm just going to do straight lines that way. Maybe I'm going to do curves, something like this. Maybe I'm going to think about something about my personality. Let's see. I am, let's say well, I'm a Taurus, so that's a bull. So I'm thinking about the shape of a bull head. What, I don't know, something like that. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe those could be cool. Is it going to be obvious that it's a bull? No. That's just kind of inspiration. So again, no right or wrong. Do something that you feel looks dynamic, that has a good sense of balance. I think for the sake of ease, I'm just going to maybe just go with something like this. But even then, I would think about, well, do I want all of these shapes to be the same width? Probably not. It could be nice to have some that were really, really thin and some that were really, really thick. So you can have more than 5 sections, but you need at least 5 sections. So again, you've got achromatic, analogous, complementary, split complementary, and triadic. So those are five areas. So once you have decided what your design is going to be, then you're going to draw it with graphite pencil right on top of your picture. Kind of like that super skinny thing in there, so maybe not so skinny, but 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5. Again, you can do more, but you just need 5. All right, so now you are ready to start mixing paint and begin your painting. So I've started on my painting, and I'm going to recommend that you start with the same area that I'm starting with, and that is with your achromatic. And the reason I think you should start with that is because it's the easiest in terms of translating this to this. They're essentially the same thing. So you're going to start with the black and white version. I decided to place my black and white section in this area. I messed up and started to paint over here, even though that's another section. I just felt like it would be kind of a nice balance. It would be equally weighted enough with the colored areas, and I like the fact that it's sort of centered but pushed off center, so it's not too, I don't know, too static or overly balanced, if there is such a thing. So what you're going to do is you'll start matching the values that you see, and you'll notice, this is my lightest value here, you'll notice that on my painting it looks a lot darker than it does on my printout. And it could be that I have it a little bit too dark, but I think it's pretty close. But what's happening is, I'll show you, I don't know if you can see this. So this is my paint on here, and then you can see it's pretty well matching this color. It's certainly not too dark. Now remember, acrylic paint dries a half step or a step darker, so you're always going to be mixing a little bit on the light side. So why does this look so much darker than this? It has to do with the fact that this is the only value other than white on my paper, so it's surrounded by all of this white. So because value is relative, meaning that something looks dark because it's next to something that's lighter, or something looks light because it's next to something that's darker, it has a total huge effect on how this color reads. And so what happens when we start painting, as beginners, we'll lay that value down and then we'll kind of freak out. We'll say like, oh my God, no, that's way, 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 way too dark. But if you are matching your paint as best you can to your photograph, and you are periodically doing something like this, where you fold your paper and then hold up the printout to the paint and then squint at it, and you can see it's pretty close. It's probably never going to be exactly this color because this is sort of a dot pattern and this is one color, but this is really close. If you squint at this, you'll see it's going to totally be passable. So what you'll do is you'll mix up a color that you need, and you want to ideally try to mix up enough that you can paint all of the areas in that section, and then that way you don't have to like remix to try to match. That can become one of the frustrating things that happens with mixing acrylic paint in an exercise like this. If you don't mix enough paint, you run out of paint, and then you try to match your color, and then that becomes like a whole fiasco. I did this in one coat. It looks like it's covering okay. If it's not covering very well, you might have to do 2 coats. So that's going to be something that you're going to have to play by ear. So now what I'm going to have to do is, and also you can start with your dark values and then work toward your lights. I like to do the opposite though. I like to work from light to dark. And then that way also, if I have a pile, so like I have a pile of this color now, or this value now, I can just add a little bit more black to it and probably get this. So that's something to think about as you go forward. I find that it's easier to start with the lights, but that's just me. Okay, so here my second value is complete. I did this large section here. All I did was add a little bit of black to the first value that I mixed, and you can see how, again, how crazy dark it looks surrounded by all this white. But when I hold it up here and I squint at it, they're really, it's a good match. Don't worry about, the tone obviously being different. This is a little bit cooler, this is a little bit warmer. That doesn't really have anything to do with it. You're just trying to articulate those values. All right. As I'm going through, I'm taking a look at my edges. I don't want any of the transfer paper line to end up showing up in the work. So there are some places where I might have to take a teeny tiny brush and kind of come in and camouflage that a little bit. I'm also making sure that it's not too transparent, that I'm not seeing a lot of the paper coming through, that it feels opaque. I'm also making sure that the paint is laying down nice and flat. I'm not using a ton of paint on my brush and getting like a gloppy mess from it. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the third value. All right, third value is done. One thing I wanted to mention, I know I talked about making sure that the transfer lines aren't showing. You also want to make sure that on the edges of your section that we don't see those lines also. So sometimes that means in painting that you have to paint a little bit over the line and then come in with, when you do this side, let's say, then you would clean it up. You don't want to totally avoid that line so that you end up with all of your lines showing. So again, no line to as little as line as possible showing up. So you can start to see this is starting to make a little bit more sense. The values are working pretty well. Again, I'm always doing a test, holding it up to my my image to make sure that it is working out. Okay, so that looks pretty good. All right, so on to the fourth. So I went ahead and did the remaining values. So I did, let's see, 2 more. You want to make sure that you leave any kind of highlight that you see in your eye, any kind of reflection. This might be a little bit hot. This is just the white of my paper. I could probably mix a super light gray that just had like the tiniest bit of black in it, but I'm okay with that for now. Even the white of your eye typically is going to have a little bit of tone on it, so it's hard to see because I've drawn all over this, but in person, this reflection is actually lighter than the sclera or the white of my eye. So think about that. Pay close attention to that. You don't want the whites of your eyes to be so white that it looks freakish. So again, even the inside of the whites of your eyes are going to have some tone in it. So at this point now I'm ready to start my next section, my next color section. And the easiest one, the most clear kind of segue is going to be for you to do your analogous. So analogous, those are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Okay, so now I'm going to think about where I'm going to put all of the other color harmonies. And you have to keep in mind that certain color harmonies have different levels of visual impact. So the one that's going to be the most kind of powerful is your complementary relationship. So remember, I'm just going to keep repeating myself, but complementary colors are opposing one another on the color wheel. So if I was starting with green, then my complement would be red. They're super, super high impact. So I have to think carefully about how much impact do I want that to have on the overall image. For me, I think I'm going to do my complement in a really small area because, again, a little goes a long way. So the one that's going to have the most kind of visual weight or impact is going to be your complementary. Then second to that is going to be your split complement. So I'm looking at this and I think I might do complementary here and then split complementary over here. That feels like some nice balance, some nice space between the two, also some nice rhythm because there'll be a certain amount of crossover or repetition with these. And then I think what I'll do is probably do my analogous here. Analogous is going to be the one that reads closest to this one in terms of visual impact. This is probably going to be the least impactful, although because it's the only black and white section, it will create some interest, right? It will create some emphasis. So I'll probably do my analogous here, and then I think I'll do my triad here, my triadic. Those are colors, again, that are evenly spaced. So it could be 3 primaries, it could be 3 secondaries, orange, green, violet, red, blue, yellow. I'm sorry, red, blue, yellow would be a primary, but it could be orange, green, and violet. Or you could do tertiaries. So it could be things like, let's say red, orange, blue, violet, and yellow, green. So that would also be a triad. So again, triads are evenly spaced on the color wheel. So now I have to decide what is going to be the color that I choose to kind of anchor this whole piece. Now you could just go willy-nilly and say like, well, I'm going to use red as my anchor color here, and I'm going to use green as my anchor color here, and I'm going to use blue as my anchor color here, and yellow as my anchor color here. And that's totally viable, but it might be more successful in terms of cohesiveness if you pick one color and then you base all of your harmonies around that one color. So you could pick your favorite color, let's say. Now my favorite color is green, and I don't know if I want a green face. So I might go a different direction. I think maybe I will do, I'm kind of feeling purple these days. I'm sort of feeling violet. I think that could be really nice. Violet, remember, is the closest to black of all of the colors, and yellow is the closest to white. So I know if I do a color like violet or blue or green, it's going to give me a lot of range in terms of values. I can do a full range with yellows, but what can end up happening is your yellows, when you start mixing black in with them or gray in with them, they start to get a little funky. They're not necessarily the most attractive colors. They can be a little challenging, but if yellow is something you want to go with, hey, go for it. So let's say I'm going to go with violet as my anchor. So that's going to mean when I do my complementary, I'm going to have violet and yellow, variations of violet and yellow here. On my split complement, instead of violet and yellow, I'm going to do violet and then yellow orange and then yellow green, which you can't see under here. right? Because I'm taking Violet's complement and then I'm using the two tertiaries to either side of it. Yeah? Okay. So, how are you going to translate the different values that you see here into color? What you're going to need to do is you're going to need to print out the value color chart that is on Camino. Now, this is not like perfect, but it's pretty darn close and it's going to be super helpful for you. So let's say I've decided that I want to use violet. And of course, I kind of take issue with this violet. It's a little too magenta, but let's go with it. And you can see sometimes that some of the values are so close. So if I was doing something like this, I'd have to kind of lie for this one and make it a little bit darker. Not as dark as this, but not as light as this, because you can see they're so close it's really hard to kind of get a understanding for what that color is doing. But what I would do is I'd come over here to the achromatic scale and I'd hold up my picture or an area of my picture right on top of it and then squint to see which value along the scale is closest to whatever color I'm trying to match or value I'm trying to match. So it looks like this is the closest one right here. That looks pretty close when I squint. So that means if I am going to do violet in that color, I'm trying to match this guy over here. And then if I was doing a violet, let's say that was this value, I think that this one is probably my closest. So that means I'm going to mix a color that looks something like that. So this is a really handy tool for you to use. Again, not perfect, but super helpful. You have to think about how you're going to use these different colors. Now, certain colors just read darker than others. If I'm doing violet as my anchor color and I'm doing a complement, let's say with yellow, violet is already so much darker than yellow, yes? So, ooh, that got out of focus. Let's see if I can get this back in focus. There we go. So I'm not going to do my shadows in yellow and my lights in violet. That doesn't really make any sense. So I would do my lights in yellow and then my darks in violet. Yeah, does that make sense? Warm colors also advance in a picture plane. So things like yellow and orange and red, those come forward. They work better for things like highlights, lights. And then your cool colors, your blues, your blue-greens, your violets, those are great for shadows. Cool colors end up receding in the picture plane. Green is one of those colors that can kind of go either way. It can be a warm green or a cool green. So you sort of just have to play around with that. So when I'm looking at something like this, I know I have a tiny little strip. Well, let's instead of the complement, let's talk about the split complement. So when I do this area, I know that my split complement is going to be again, violet, yellow orange, and yellow green. That's using violet as my anchor color. So just to be super repetitive, complement is straight across. A split complement uses one color and then the two colors that flank it. So this is my split complement that I'm going to use. I guess I should turn it like this so that my text matches just for you. There you go. So I think what I'll do is I'll do my any kind of light color or value. So stuff like this, here or here. Those are probably going to be my yellow oranges. And then things like, I don't know, mid shadows, like maybe this guy, maybe these two values. That I could use my yellow green for. That could be really nice. And then my really dark stuff, I'm going to use variations of violet. So there's no set rule for it. I don't have to do 2, 2, 2, 2, and 2. I could have more of one color and less of another, but I figure, you know, pretty evenly dividing it is probably a good place to start. So exactly the same process that I did for my achromatic, I am starting, again, I like to start with my lights. I'm going to start mixing my light hues with colors that are going to match this value. So this isn't quite the yellow-green that I want, but it's pretty close. It's close enough. So I can take this light value, hold it up to my chart, land on a value that I think is working, and then come on over to there. And I'll probably make it a little bit greener than that, a little bit less yellowy. Okay, and then I would mix, if I'm going to go yellow, then I mix my next, or yellow-green, I mix my next one. So I'd come over here, match the value, and then say, okay, this is going to be pretty close to that. All right, so let's go, I'm going to go ahead and get started with that. So I've started what's going to be the split complementary color palette, and I realized that I told you when you do yours, it probably makes the most sense to do analogous first, and I stand by that. But the whole process is going to be the same in terms of matching value, so don't let this mess you up that I'm starting with my split complement. Really, you can start with any that you want because you've got your color chart. So this is my yellow orange. And you can see when it's the lightest value, it looks pretty yellow orangey. And then I mixed in gray to get this tone. And you can see it totally changes the color. So mixing any kind of black with any kind of yellow or orange, you get these weird kind of mucky, almost green colors. So you might want to think about the colors that you pick. Honestly, I believe that the colors that are going to give you probably the most attractive result, just because of the way that they mix with gray and black, those are going to be your cooler colors like violet and blue and red. So I would kind of stay away from picking yellow or orange as an anchor color. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have to use those colors in different in different harmonies, but you can probably use them in smaller doses. So just think about that. Maybe blue, purple, red are going to be better colors for you to stick with. So definitely the color chart helps you in terms of mixing your values and you know, seeing what you need, what you want. But another really, really useful tool is your smartphone, your camera phone. And if you don't have a camera phone, let me know. You could always take a picture of it, send it to me, and I can convert it for you. So let me see if this shows up at all. Is that going to work? Let me take a photo. Let's do like this. Okay, so here is this photo that I just took. Focus camera. All right, so now I'm going to edit it. So I'm going to go to edit. And you might have a different kind of phone that has like a different kind of photo processing app on it. It's all good. But I'm going to desaturate it. So I'm going to come to here. I'm just making it black and white basically. So if I type on black and white and then black and white, that converts it to black and white. So you can see that I'm a little bit dark on this color. This was the second pass that I did. The first color that I mixed was way too light, so I think I overshot it a little bit. But for what you guys are experiencing your first time out, this is totally fine. So when I squint at this up here, it's close enough for like horseshoes and government work. I did a pretty darn good job with this right in here, but I got this a little bit dark. Part of that is because, again, the acrylic paint dries darker too. So sometimes it's not a bad idea to hit your test before you commit to a whole area. Hit it with a blow dryer just to speed up the drying process, and that can save you some time too. So your camera phone and desaturating it, huge help. I have now finished my first colored section. So this is my split complementary. I have, let's see, so I've got the yellow-orange, and this is actually yellow-orange but with gray mixed in. And then I've got yellow-green mixed with grays, right, because they need to be in shadow. And then I've got purple or violet mixed with a light gray, a darker gray, and then just black, a tiny, tiny bit of black on there. So if I do the photo trick again, and let's see, take a picture, and then I'll show you the picture here. Looks so cool. And then I'm going to hit edit again and desaturate it, make it black and white. You can see it's not too bad. The grays work pretty well. I didn't change anything about this value here, so it's still a little bit dark, but I just want you guys to be aware that I'm not looking for this to be perfect. Certainly if you have more time and you can go back in and make it perfect, that's awesome. But this is awfully darn close. And visually, in terms of the color, it looks really nice. It looks really good. So I'm pretty happy with that. So now the next thing you'll do is you will continue along with all of your other color harmonies. So my plan is eventually I'll do my complement here, so it'll be violet and yellow. Then, excuse me, then I'm going to do my analogous, and so I have to decide if I'm going to go, or maybe I'll use this instead. If I'm going to go, so I've got violet, right? Am I going to go violet, blue, or am I going to go blue, violet, red, violet, or am I going to go violet, red? So you don't want to go too far. You're looking for one secondary, one tertiary, and one primary. I wouldn't want to go all the way from like blue to red, even though technically that is analogous and that these colors are so close to each other on the color wheel. But if I use two different primaries, or for that matter, two different secondaries, basically two of the same kind of color, then it's going to be too much contrast. So you want to think about using that color and then the two that immediately flank it. So I think I will probably go, violet, blue eventually, but it's completely up to you. And then I would use the same, same thinking in terms of what I used for my light colors and what I used for my darker colors. If I were to go violet, red, I'd probably use red for my light tones, and then red, violet for my medium tones, and then violet for my darkest ones. All right.